You know, when we think about war, we picture weapons made of steel and explosives, right? A tank, a battleship, a bomber. But what if I told you that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't forged in a factory at all? Sometimes it's just reality, the simple, overwhelming truth of a society's strength. A truth so powerful it can dismantle an enemy's entire belief system from the inside out. This is that story.
So let me ask you this. What is the nation's most powerful weapon, really? Is it the tank that tears up the battlefield? The bomber that rules the sky? Or could it be something as simple as almost ridiculous as a slice of white bread? That question, believe it or not, is right at the heart of one of the most incredible psychological events of World War II.
Our story kicks off in mid-1943. All across the American heartland, trains are running day and night. And on board, some of the toughest soldiers on the planet, the battle-hardened veterans of Rommel's legendary Afrika Korps, captured after the fall of North Africa. And they arrived armed with more than just their military training. They came armed with a worldview, a reality that had been meticulously built for them piece by years of non-stop propaganda.
And this, right here, was the gospel. The absolute truth that was hammered into every single German soldier. They were taught that America was a joke, a failed state, a chaotic mess of different races, weakened by arguments, and totally incapable of building anything or fighting a real war. This was the lie they were told. And that lie was about to have a head-on collision with the truth.
And the sheer scale of this, it's just staggering. We're not talking about a handful of guys. Over the course of the war, 371,683 German prisoners of war were brought to the United States. Nobody planned this, but it became one of the biggest psychological experiments in modern history, and it happened completely by accident.
So, the first cracks in their belief system didn't come from some boring re-education class. Not at all. The first blows were way more basic, more visceral. They came from the simple, undeniable evidence of their own senses, the things they could see and taste and touch that just didn't line up with the world they'd been told existed.
It started the second they got off the boat. Just imagine, you've been surviving for months in the desert on what was basically a rock-hard biscuit and watery fake coffee. Then, suddenly you're in a mess hall being served soft, fresh white bread, real coffee with real sugar, and meat, not once a week, but twice a day. This wasn't a special propaganda meal, it was just the standard food for an American GI. The prisoners wrote letters home, totally bewildered, talking about seeing American sailors scraping leftovers into the trash. And the leftovers were bigger than a full German ration on the front lines. This tidal wave of simple stuff, of just abundance, was the first major shock to their system.
And this sensory overload just kept going on their train ride into America's heartland. See, they were expecting to be shoved into filthy cattle cars, because that's what their own army did. Instead, they were put on passenger trains, actual coaches with cushioned seats and dining cars. And at night, as they looked out the windows, they saw the second impossible thing. A country blazing with light. Not just cities, small towns, lone farmhouses out in the middle of nowhere, all lit up. This was totally unimaginable in blacked-out, war-torn Germany.
And pretty quickly, this feeling of personal comfort shifted to an understanding of America's raw national power. The prisoners started to witness the gears of an industrial machine that didn't just contradict the propaganda, it made Germany's own impressive war machine look tiny by comparison.
Just try to wrap your head around this. At its peak, the Willow Run factory in Michigan was rolling a brand new 4-engine B-24 Liberator bomber off the assembly line every 63 minutes. Prisoners working on farms nearby could literally set their watches by it. This wasn't just a number they could ignore in a newspaper, it was a constant, visible river of air power flowing right over their heads.
And this chart really shows you the secret sauce behind that power. Remember those lights they saw from the train? Well, this is why. By 1943, over 90% of American farms had electricity. In Germany, it was less than 20%. That power grid wasn't just lighting up houses. It was powering a continent-sized factory that was running 24/7, fueling a global war, and it didn't even seem to be breaking a sweat.
And when they eventually learned the actual numbers, it was just soul-crushing. 300,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks. In 1 year, 1943, America launched more naval ships than the entire Japanese Empire built during the whole war. And get this, by the fall of that same year, American shipyards had already replaced every single Allied ship that had been sunk by German U-boats since 1939. At that point, it wasn't propaganda versus reality anymore, it was just the mathematical certainty of defeat.
So being surrounded by all this overwhelming strength forced a really deep shift in their thinking. The question changed from what can America do to a much more dangerous question. What is America? They started to bump into the societal software, ideas about freedom and individual rights, and even kindness that were completely alien to the world they came from.
And maybe the biggest psychological gut punch of all landed on Christmas Day 1943. All across the country, local churches and regular people sent gift packages and food to the German POW camps. For the prisoners, this just did not compute. Their entire ideology taught them that kindness to your enemy is a sign of weakness. But what they saw felt like the exact opposite. It felt like a nation so powerful, so unbelievably confident that it was going to win, that it could afford to be kind to the very men who were trying to destroy it. It wasn't weakness. It was an expression of unimaginable strength. And then there was the intellectual shock. The camps had libraries with thousands of books you could read, totally uncensored. Prisoners could sign up for university courses. They even published 135 of their own camp newspapers, with a crazy amount of freedom. But the wildest thing? The Americans showed them movies like The Grapes of Wrath, a film that's all about poverty and government failure in America. The very idea that a nation at war would not only allow, but actually show its own flaws to its enemies, well, that was a direct assault on the whole Nazi idea of total state control over what people think.
So what do you call what these men were going through? Well, psychologists actually have a name for it. Ideological collapse syndrome. It's what happens when the entire framework you use to understand the world gets systematically torn down by undeniable proof that it's wrong. Your mind can't just float in a void. It has to fight a new way to make sense of things. And for thousands of these men, the result was a complete rejection of Nazism and a desperate hunger to understand this American system that had so completely and utterly defeated their own.
Okay, so why does any of this matter today? Because the story doesn't end in the prison camps. This mass psychological shift had a direct, real, and powerful impact on the post-war world. It turned former enemies into the unlikely architects of a brand new, democratic Europe.
Two final events in 44 and 45 really sealed the deal. First, the newsreels of the D-Day invasion, showing an ocean of ships stretching to the horizon. It confirmed everything they'd seen about America's unstoppable organizational power. And then came the footage from the liberated concentration camps. And that confirmed something far, far worse. Not just a military defeat, but the absolute moral bankruptcy of the entire Nazi project. There was nothing left to believe in. It was all gone.
And this right here perfectly illustrates the legacy. Take the story of a guy named Walter Hallstein. In 1944, he's a German officer in a POW camp in Mississippi. While he's there, he gets involved in the camp's education programs, even teaching law to the other prisoners. A little over a decade later, that very same man becomes the first ever president of the European Economic Community, the organization that would become the European Union, helping to build a peaceful, prosperous Europe from the absolute ashes of the old one.
Honestly, you can think of these hundreds of thousands of men as a kind of unofficial Marshall Plan that happened before the official one. They didn't just read about American efficiency, they lived inside of it for years. They saw the methods, they learned the principles. And when they finally went back to a Germany that was in total ruin, they became its most powerful advocates for change. They became the managers and engineers who put those American techniques to work, fueling what the world came to know as the German economic miracle.
And that all brings us back to a really crucial question, one that's just as relevant today. In the constant battle of ideas, what's actually more powerful in the end? The story you're told, no matter how loudly or how often it's shouted at you, or the undeniable reality of a free and prosperous society that you can see with your own two eyes? The experience of these German soldiers seems to give us a pretty clear answer. In the long run, reality is the one weapon that can never, ever be defeated.